Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is the Vulgar Marxist. Welcome to what is the first and possibly the last response video I am going to do. Hopefully the last. I really don't enjoy these at all. In any event, before we begin, I've inserted rather large amount of imagery over the audio files for this video. This is my imagery, not the person who is speaking. That said, let's begin.
I really did not want to make this video at all, actually.
Awesome. That makes two of us.
But I've seen just a few too many comments completely misconstruing what I understand to be pretty basic concepts and like pretty basic like requirements for, just basic human decency.
You mean like making certain dinners on the table by 5 p.m. and the house is cleaned every day? Oh, shoot, no, that was patriarchy. Durr! These things change so frequently, it's hard for me to keep track.
That I feel like it's like the same way that I feel when like liberals or conservatives ask me like very basic questions like, oh, can you explain in layman's terms, why the free market is bad?
Can you explain how the methods of attaining socialism will automatically and instantaneously result in very nearly all racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination being unilaterally abolished?
It's like, really? Like, honestly, guys, like, we're past this. Like, we're so far past this.
I had very high hopes myself, but then you're here, so bang goes that theory.
And we don't have time for this. Like, we don't have time.
On that point, we are in complete and total agreement.
So when I first found leftist YouTube and like the leftist online community, that's basically when I first heard the term brocialism, coming from obviously an academic background. Like that's just not a thing. This is like the first time that I've heard people talking about IDPol and intersectionality in this very, very broad and generalized way. People actually had like misconceptions about intersectionality that I've seen that really misconstrued. This is not completely surprising to me, as I really doubt that many of the anti-IDPol leftists or the reactionary, like, anti-SJW crew, I doubt that any of them have really read much feminist theory, let alone intersectional feminist theory. But it's been a bit disappointing to hear people take a lot of the same stances against IDPol as the reactionaries.
It is disappointing that after half a decade of screaming, "Educate yourself, shitlord," the majority of people have formed completely independent conclusions about what social justice is, with no reference to what you think it is because you couldn't be asked to tell them. Oh boy.
I'm gonna start by saying, if you hate bourgeois feminism, I am with you. Like, if your idea of successful feminism is just more high-powered female CEOs, then I'm not your girl, right? I'm just so not about that at all. Like the Hillary thing in my mind actually did a lot for intersectionality, because although of course, there were some people that were thinking that voting for her would be a feminist act, I actually saw the opposite. I saw the reaction to that being very intense. Like from everyone in my networks, I just saw a ton of pushback. And then, coming out of that at subsequent women's marches or in, spaces like feminist spaces, there was a much bigger emphasis on intersectionality, on class, on race, on liberation along all of those lines. And we have to remember that there are so many different, like IDPol means so many different things. IDPol doesn't just mean one thing, right? So I hear a lot of people just assuming that IDPol equals some like blue-haired freak on the street corner screaming "fuck cis white men" and just having a meltdown or something like that, and that's considered IDPol. Like, no, that's just a crazy person screaming. I mean, I don't want to say it's just a crazy person screaming, because obviously all of these things are context specific, but I definitely have seen some people who probably have not read feminist or intersectional theory either, really doing a disservice to the movement, just being like crazies. But like, okay, where have we had seen that? Everywhere in the world, you know what I mean? Like, how many crazed idiots do we have to denounce, in like Antifa or something? But does that mean that anti-fascism is not a movement that we should be supporting? Does it actually invalidate the underlying importance of what that movement is about? Like, no, it doesn't, right? So by saying, or just calling it IDPOL in the complete abstract, like, what does that mean? It lumps together all of these random fools who are, going on Tumblr and posting dumb shit, which, by the way, like, how many people have actually encountered anybody like that in their actual real life?
Anecdote time. I had the great joy of attending one of the most radical colleges in the United States back around the start of the Bush presidency, 2001, 2002. If any of you know the origin of Yes Means Yes Consent, it was the school where the original Yes Means Yes Consent rules were written. I did not know one person like this. I knew 200 people like this. Let me repeat again. I knew the people who wrote the very first Yes Means Yes Consent rule, was standing in the room and raised my hand asking, hey, if person A is drunk and person B is also drunk, who's responsible to get consent there? And received for my trouble only blank stares.
Like, the reason that we have that impression is that these videos, like, people like that have been caught on tape, and they are obviously handpicked and highlighted by the reactionaries, showing this is what leftism is about, this is what identity politics is. And it's like, well, no, it's not. Like, that's not actual politics. That's just someone getting pissed and trying to put someone else down, right? Or like someone getting offended. Like, that's not actual politics. Like, politics is mobilization. Politics is, coming together to voice your concerns, to demand recognition in an open, political sphere. So like, calling that IDPOL, it lumps all of that shit in with people with actual important struggles and people who are actually facing discrimination that we should be allies with, especially as socialists wanting to build a movement, and, as socialists who are actually supposed to care about people and their oppressions and their struggles. So it lumps all these crazies in with trans people who want spaces free of violence and attacks based on their gender expression. It lumps them in with, the struggles of First Nations. So when we say fuck IDPOL, like, you fucking liberal trash, it's like, who exactly are we saying fuck you to? Because identity politics, like, that encompasses all of those things. So by saying fuck you, like, it's just completely indiscriminate. So first of all, like, not all struggles are revolutionary. So if Ontario banned abortions tomorrow, I would be out on the fucking front lines. You better believe I would be raging. They would probably catch a few videos of me screaming some annoying shit and then post it on the internet like, look, this is what IDPOL is, But you know what? Like, that's so important. It's so fucking important. And I would expect my male comrades to have my back on that. I would expect to see them standing beside me on the front lines of protests, having my back for that. Because, like, you know what? If you want me to be your comrade, then you better be ready to fucking be mine. Like, you know what I mean? I don't want to sound like I'm only doing this if you're going to help me. Like, no. But if our whole goal is like moving beyond oppression, moving beyond discrimination, then if I have a legitimate concern, I mean, maybe you can make the case that this is related to the economic, but you know what? Until we have the revolution, I still want control over my own fucking body. So, if I have a concern like that is really legitimate, then you cannot just, like, don't lump me in with all these crazy liberal bourgeois feminists. You know what I mean? It's like, but this is really a concern that needs allyship. And yeah, if it's about building a movement, then why don't you want to tap in to groups of people who actually have concerns, and they are organized and they are expressing them? Like, talk about educate, agitate, and organize. Like, these people are already agitated and they're already organized.
Please make the hurting stop. I can't believe you made this simple an error. Simply because someone happens to believe they have an issue, happens to be organized, happens to be agitated, does not mean I want them as my ally.
Some things will be directly related to the economic or to class warfare, but in terms of like having empathy for other people, not that many people have access to radical education or radical theory. Like, how many people do you know, honestly, in real life that have had access to that or have been exposed to that? Like, I know a lot more people who have been exposed to neoclassical economics than I do. Well, I mean, that's not true because I'm like all of my colleagues obviously know what I'm talking about, but you know, you get what I'm saying, right? So it shouldn't be shocking to us living under this really prevalent capitalist hegemony. It shouldn't be shocking to us that people with these grievances who are organizing might not fully be aware of the broader political and economic circumstances that are shaping their struggle. So, you know, they're already agitated, they're already organized. Like, let's bring some education over there instead of just being like, oh, this is just fucking liberal bullshit. Do you know what I mean? I just feel like, how unproductive is that? Like, what? Is that really going to be our standpoint? It's just like, oh, fuck, you guys do your own thing. You're idiots. You don't see what the real problem is. It just sounds really like fucking tone deaf coming from a lot of like young white dudes. People are getting so offended, like, oh, like people don't want to hear the opinions of like white men. It's like, that's not true. Like, mostly everybody that I watch on YouTube is a young white dude, and so it's like, I'm very interested in your opinions, but it just sounds a little bit tone deaf coming from people who obviously have not experienced a lot of these different struggles, just kind of saying like, oh, we don't have to worry about it, socialism will just fix everything, right? And if we want people who are experiencing legitimate struggles and racism and sexism to understand like the bigger picture and to be on our side, then I just don't see that as being a good way to go about it at all. Particularly because we're not going to know the concerns or the struggles of people until they organize and bring those to our attention. Like, for an example, so myself as a white cis female, when I want to go to the washroom, I go to the washroom. I walk in there, I do my thing, I walk out, nobody looks at me funny, nobody threatens me with violence, nobody actually, you know, enacts violence upon me because I'm doing that. It's just a normal thing that I do. So me, coming from that standpoint, having this personal gaze and this personal experience, I am probably not going to, like, unless somebody tells me that they're having a problem, I'm not going to assume that there are other people that are having like really big problems in there. You know what I mean? Because I don't have that experience. It's not something that would immediately jump into my mind because I've never experienced that. It's, to me, that's a really foreign thought. It's a really foreign idea. So until, you know, trans people organized and brought that as a point of contention out into the public sphere, I didn't think about it.
The reason you have been staring at a picture of the Founding Fathers for the last several seconds is to illustrate why this argument is utterly vapid. No one had to tell the people walking into the Constitutional Convention that slavery was going to be a problem. There wasn't a single African at the convention. However, regardless, everyone heading into that room understood that the peculiar institution of the South was going to be a major sticking point. Further, no one had to tell the Catholic Church that poverty was a problem, nor did they have to tell any other religion. People understood that the issues of the poor, working or not, would inevitably result in instability within society. The fact that this woman needs people to tell her about social issues before she notices them is a reflection of her issues, not our issues.
And, it's not that I'm like a terrible person, or it's not like, oh, my opinion doesn't matter because I'm a cis white woman. It's that I just would never have thought of that because I don't experience it. So, like, think about that. Like, there are so many things that we just do not know about, that we cannot know about, and that we will not know about until people who are experiencing that struggle, often people who share the same identity, until they organize and demand recognition for that concern. And that is essentially what the right to narrate is. I've seen some people just really, really misconstrue the right to narrate and just take it as like a personal attack of like, oh, yeah, if I'm a white male, a cis white male, I don't have an opinion. It's like,
the right to narrate has historically been the right of the elite to dictate what is or is not legitimate in the eyes of the public. The idea that capitalism is freedom is the right to narrate. Anyone with two brain cells to bang together should understand this. The elite will always have greater access to media resources than those trying to start a grassroots movement, and therefore always be able to narrate more effectively the interests that benefit themselves than the interests that benefit anyone else. Declare that whoever happens to be in control of the platform has the right to narrate whatever the hell they want, and you will inevitably end up with a narration benefiting entirely those who control access to platforms.
are you serious? Like, this is the point that I mean, like we're so far past this, guys. Like, we're past this. Like, that's the reactionary standpoint, thinking that that's what that means. That's not what that means. It's just a very, very obvious thing that, like, capitalists should not be the only speakers for the interests of the workers. Similarly, cis white women should not be the only speakers talking about the issues of trans women, because I don't know what trans women are going through, to be honest, because I'm not going through it. So we need to listen to people who are going through the struggle, provide them with a platform, or, oftentimes we don't provide them with a platform, but they organize anyway and they demand that platform and they take that platform, which I commend, and I think we should all commend as socialists. And like, that's IDPOL. That's what it is. So it's like, why are we not commending this?
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it right here. Why are we not commending the ability of the few to dictate the agenda to the many? Oh, wait, because every time that's happened in history, it's been an unmitigated disaster. Look at what happened when kings and princes were allowed to dictate to the masses what their concerns should be. Look what happened when priests and judges were allowed to do the same. Look what happened when elected officials did these things. This isn't hard to figure out. If you allow a handful of people with interests entirely contrary to the interests of the majority of working people to dictate to working people what their struggle ought to be, you are going to end up with yet another entrenched elite that you will have to later remove.
And yeah, it's very, very strange to me that so many leftists are misconstruing these ideas, like the right to narrate, which to me is such a basic and obvious thing. Like, I'm sorry, like, do you want to narrate my concerns as a woman to me?
If those concerns include not being able to arbitrarily fire your employees because one of them got cancer, and another of them is not kowtowing to your elite social circle in the manner you would like, then yes.
Another example is veganism. People saying basically, fuck the vegan movement because the real problem is capitalism, and we can't make any conceivable gains for animals until capitalism is overthrown. I'm like, first of all, girl, if you're reading my videos as anything but anti-capitalist, I don't know what to tell you. Like, obviously people experiencing struggles should also be socialists. And obviously, yes, capitalism contributes one fucking hell of a lot to the problem and needs to be overthrown. But the idea that we don't have to think about shit or, examine what we are doing and make changes while capitalism is still running is just fucking bullshit. Like, I call so much bullshit on that. Like, what do you think? All of a sudden we're gonna overthrow capitalism and then people who have been eating animals their whole life and wearing animal products and everything are just gonna stop doing that and think, oh, we're living under socialism now. I guess I should stop oppressing animals and killing them. And, like, no. Has that ever happened before? Or, like, has anyone even tried to build that into their framework?
I could do a very long spiel here, but instead I think I'm just gonna play the guy who built that into his framework.
Bread, it is bread that the revolution needs. Let others spend their time in issuing pompous proclamations, in decorating themselves lavishly with official gold lace, and in talking about political liberty. Be it ours to see, from the first day of the revolution to the last, in all the provinces fighting for freedom, that there is not a single man who lacks bread, not a single woman compelled to stand with a wearied crowd outside the bakehouse door, that happily a coarse loaf may be thrown to her in charity, not a single child pining for want of food. It has always been the middle-class idea to harangue about great principles, great lies rather. The idea of the people will be to provide bread for all, and while middle-class citizens and workmen infested with middle-class ideas admire their own rhetoric in the talking shops, and practical people are engaged in endless discussions on forms of government, we, the utopian dreamers, we shall have to consider the question of daily bread.
Ma'am, do you actually believe, for a tenth of a fraction of a second, that people who barely have access to fresh vegetables are going to care about the condition of pigs and chickens? Really?
So making statements like that, to me, kind of seems like it's just like an excuse to not think about those things, to not re-examine your own complicity in those things, to not re-examine the way that you might benefit from those exclusions or oppressions. Just thinking like, we don't have to think about that, basically because I don't have to think about that because I'm not experiencing it. And that's when it becomes a little bit tone deaf, because it's like, if you're privileged enough to not have to think about these things on a daily basis, then awesome, but recognize that as a privilege, because not everyone has that same privilege. For some people, it is inescapable that they think about these things all day, every day of their waking life,
Again, ladies and gentlemen, this is jaw-dropping. Not having time to think about anything other than where you are going to get shelter, food, and clothing for tomorrow. Living hand to mouth because you are a wage slave in a capitalist system is privilege. Wow.
Another example is people with disabilities. So recently I was at a conference. It was actually the Marxist Capital After 150 Years conference, which was really fucking awesome.
I'm curious, have you ever been to a paper plant or a recycling plant?
But anyway, we were in the auditorium, and this was basically the least accessible auditorium that I've ever been in. But I did not even think about that, because I don't have to think about it. Like, I walked in the door, I walked down the stairs, I took a seat. I didn't sit there thinking like, gosh, this auditorium seems incredibly inaccessible, because I had no problem in there, right? But this poor girl, She came in, she had to sit at the very, very back because she couldn't get on the stairs, obviously. And so she was right by the door. She couldn't hear anything because people kept coming in and out, and there was this buzzer going off behind her head. It was actually awful. I felt so bad for her, and she kept putting up her hand and trying to say something. But people were just basically ignoring her because, I don't know, they couldn't do anything, right? So she ended up just leaving really, really upset and not being able to take in any of the panels that she wanted to see, right? And so, like, tell me that under socialism, they would have built that auditorium in the perfect way possible to accommodate all people with all possible disabilities without differently abled people actually organizing and bringing those concerns to light. You know what I mean? Like, how would they have the foresight to do that if they don't listen to people who are organizing and experiencing something like that? Because if you're not experiencing it, you're not going to know about it. And again, that is the right to narrate. People with those disabilities should be narrating to us what their problems are. I shouldn't be narrating to her what her problems are when I don't fucking know about them.
So let me be perfectly clear here. What we have just witnessed is that the right to narrate is nothing more than the right of some doctorate-holding petty bourgeoisie at a conference to declare her problems supersede the problems of dozens, hundreds, thousands, millions of workers who will never be able to go to a conference like that. Do you seriously think even one of those plants would ever be wheelchair accessible? No. What a ridiculous contention. More importantly, it would never be an issue because the people who are occupying the conferences would never for a tenth of a fraction of a second deny to work in those plants. I mean, seriously, those plants are horrible places to work. This is why all serious socialists, Kropotkin not the least among them, flatly demanded that productive labor be shared among all. Yet, I doubt this has even occurred to you.
And from just like a basic human decency standpoint, people should not be discriminated against and made to feel less than and inferior and just awful in their own skin because of something like that that's related to their identity or related to something that they can't change. Like on the left, the word autistic is thrown around like it's just nothing. And I'm sure for actually autistic people, it's incredibly demeaning. But, you know, people would rather just get pissed and say IDPOL is fucking liberal trash than just bother to pay attention to what they're saying and pay attention to whether they're hurting other people around them.
Projection, thy name is Minxie.
And so my final point or my final concern is that if we are writing off all of these struggles, all of these people coming together, making these demands, if we're writing these all off as IDPOL, how are we going to know what the main concerns are that we need to build into our methods for movement building and for, you know, socialist governance, post-capitalism?
If only there was someone we could ask, a book we could read.
We undertake to give you the use of our houses, stores, streets, means of transport, schools, museums, etc., on condition that from 20 to 45 or 50 years of age, you consecrate 4 or 5 hours a day to some work recognized as necessary to existence. Choose yourself the producing groups which you wish to join, or organize a new group, provided that it will undertake to produce necessaries. And as for the remainder of your time, combine together with whomsoever you like, for recreation, art or science, according to the bent of your taste. 12 or 1500 hours of work a year in one of the groups producing food, clothes or houses, or employed in public sanitation, transport and so on, is all we ask of you. For this amount of work we guarantee to you a free use of all that these groups produce or will produce, but if not one of the thousands of groups of our federation will receive you, whatever be their motive, if you are absolutely incapable of producing anything useful, or if you refuse to do it, then live like an isolated man or like an invalid. If we are rich enough to give you the necessaries of life, we shall be delighted to give them to you. You are a man, and you have a right to live. But as you wish to live under special conditions, and leave the ranks, it is more than probable that you will suffer for it in your daily relations with other citizens. You will be looked upon as a ghost of bourgeois society, unless some friend of yours, discovering you to be a talent, kindly free you from all moral obligation towards society, by doing all the necessary work for you. And finally, if it does not please you, go and look for other conditions elsewhere in the wide world, or else seek adherents and organize with them on novel principles. We prefer our own.
Like, I've heard people say before that, oh, we don't need to worry. Like, don't worry, women, don't worry, people of color. We don't need to worry about all this bigotry and all this abuse and all this violence, because socialism is just going to solve everything. And I've heard people say, like, I don't actually understand what this means, but that, like, the methods of attaining socialism will just automatically solve every other issue.
I have never understood how what should be so elementary and simple a point could possibly escape people. The reason racism and sexism exist is because it is necessary for the laboring class to limit the quantity of labor sold to the market in order to maintain wages above starvation rates. This is something anyone familiar with what has happened to wages as a portion of GDP in the last 50 or so years should understand. As the portion of population selling labor increased, wages fell. This struck European American males particularly hard and benefited literally no one except the rich. What did Trump scream at his crowds over and over throughout his campaign? They're coming to take your jobs. They're coming to take your jobs. They're crossing the border to steal your jobs. You don't get why that's important? You don't get why that's relevant to everything we're seeing? The ability of the working class to maintain their subsistence is the origin of racism and sexism in our society. Women were denied jobs to ensure men's wages were high enough to feed, clothe, and house a family of 4. It now requires, functionally, 2 workers to do what we used to be able to do with 1 worker 50 years ago. Racism was directly and immediately the product of rich whites in the South trying to divide their European indentured servants against their African indentured servants. And that continues to this very day. Racism is nothing more than an effort by the rich to divide the working class against itself. Yes, this was aided and abetted by unions who understood that in order to maintain high wages, they had to limit the number of people applying for jobs at factories. That's 101 economics. So where is the confusion here? When we abolish the wages system, when we say that the ability of an individual to benefit from their labor has no relation to the number of people selling labor at any given time, the motivation to constrain the number of people selling labor at any given time will disappear. This video has taken me 2 entire days to produce, and frankly, I don't consider the rest of her video to be noteworthy enough to spend time on it. I'm going to end this video here. I think this is perhaps the longest video I've yet done, which is why I don't like doing response videos. They take so much blasted time. There is now a quick programming note. Back to school is hell for truck drivers, which is why I have not been producing as many videos as I would like. Christmas is even worse. It is entirely probable I will go completely silent from November through January. I apologize to you for this in advance. It really is inescapable. Like, we'll be running 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. I'll probably sleep on my 1 day a week off, just sleep the whole day. I won't have time to make any videos, as much as I might like. That said, after this, I am going to finally begin sorting through the disaster that was Bad Mouse's debate with Sargon, and hopefully get that done before Halloween, at which juncture I'm probably not going to be able to do much of anything. Take care and have a lovely evening to all of you.